Kylian Mbappe has bought a football club. Well, what else is a 25-year-old to do with some spare cash? 2 weeks ago, Mbappe's investment firm Coalition Capital, which is a subsidiary of Mbappe's principal holding company Interconnected Ventures, acquired an 80% stake in Stade Malherbe Caen. Caen are not some local amateur team that Mbappe is throwing a bit of cash behind in a charitable gesture. They are a serious football club. In the 1990s, Caen finished 5th in Ligue 1, qualifying for the UEFA Cup. Only relegated from Ligue 1 in 2019, Mbappe actually played against Caen twice during his time at PSG and 4 times during his time at Monaco. The last time that Mbappe faced the club that he now owns, in February 2019, he scored both of PSG's goals in a 2-1 win, helping to condemn Caen to relegation. Over the past 3 years, Caen have come fairly close to making a return to Ligue 1, finishing 7th, 5th and 6th in the cash-strapped second tier of French football, but now they are optimistic that Mbappe's contacts, resources and winning mentality will be the catalyst behind a Viking revolution within the French game. Mbappe's takeover raises some interesting questions, both in regards to why a 25-year-old footballer at the peak of his powers would want to preoccupy himself by owning a football club, but also in terms of potential conflicts of interest. What would happen, for example, if Caen were to win promotion, qualify for Europe, and be drawn against Real Madrid? That might sound unlikely, with Caen currently competing in Ligue 2, but Brest, who qualified for this season's Champions League, were in Ligue 2 as recently as 2019, Lens, who were in the Champions League last season and qualified for Europe again this season, only won promotion from Ligue 2 in 2020, and Monaco, Kylian Mbappe's former club, went from Ligue 2 in 2013 to being Ligue 1 runners-up in 2014 and reaching the Champions League quarter-final in 2015. So, stranger things have certainly happened. Or what about if Mbappe were to return to Ligue 1 at some stage, which hardly seems unimaginable, where, assuming that they can win promotion, playing against the club that he now owns wouldn't just be possible, but inevitable? Well, it is these kinds of questions, along with the more pressing one of Mbappe's motives and the precedent that this may set, that today's video is all about. To be perfectly honest, I'm surprised that this hasn't been a bigger story, at least in the Anglophone press. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to Caen, the city where William the Conqueror both lived and was buried, as we take a look at Kylian Mbappe's new football club, why he's bought them, and whether other footballers are likely to follow suit. When I first saw that Kylian Mbappe had bought Caen, through a friend messaging me and asking me to make a video about it, my first thought, aside from, that's quite interesting, was, is there any precedent for this? There are, of course, several former footballers who have become club owners. Dave Whelan, who owned Wigan Athletic between 1995 and 2018, was a fullback who represented Blackburn Rovers and Crewe Alexandra. Brazilian legend Ronaldo owns controlling interests in both newly promoted La Liga side Real Valladolid and his former club Cruzeiro, and Manchester United's class of 92 stars, Nicky Butt, Ryan Giggs, Gary Neville, Phil Neville and Paul Scholes, each bought a 10% stake in Salford City in 2014, later to be joined by David Beckham, who also founded and owns 10% of the Major League Soccer franchise Inter Miami. All of those players were retired by the time that they bought or invested in football clubs though, with the exception of Giggs, who was 41 and retired a few months after buying 10% of Salford. There are some active players who have gone into ownership, but none of them are really analogous to Mbappe. Hector Bellerin purchased a stake in 4th tier Forest Green Rovers during his time at Arsenal in 2020, but nothing like a controlling interest. Didier Drogba, Jamie Vardy and Paolo Maldini have all co-owned clubs outside of Major League Soccer in the United States, but again, typically to put a familiar face behind a consortium at clubs that are incapable of winning promotion to the top flight due to the concept not existing in America. And the likes of Sadio Mane, Demba Ba, Andres Iniesta and Zlatan Ibrahimovic all acquired ownership stakes before retiring from football, but all in distant minnows that felt far removed from where they were playing their football. Sadio Mane, for example, bought Bruges Foot 18, a French 4th tier team that was only formally founded via a merger 3 years ago, a few months after he had left European football behind to join Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia. The closest comparison that I can think of to Mbappe's takeover of Caen is perhaps FC Andorra, who were bought by Gerard Piqué's Cosmos Holding Group in December 2018, but even then, the two scenarios are pretty different. For a start, Piqué was already 31 and retired from international football, almost 32, rather than only 25. FC Andorra were in the fifth tier of Spanish football at the time, not the second tier of French football, meaning that they weren't even fully professional, and their average attendance was just a few hundred people, not 15 to 20,000. Of course, one of the primary reasons why this is such a recent phenomenon is because of how quickly and how radically the finances of professional football have changed. Mbappe is reported to have paid €15 million to acquire an 80% stake in Caen. 20 years ago, the idea of a 25-year-old footballer having the resources to complete such a deal would have been inconceivable, but Mbappe's 2-year deal at PSG, signed in 2022, was worth a reported €380 million, meaning that the €15 million that he paid for Caen is the equivalent of just 4 weeks' wages, maybe 7 or 8 after tax, and that is excluding any of Mbappe's considerable income from various commercial activities. The finances in football now have become so warped, they are almost incomprehensible. Last summer, Mbappe was reportedly offered a €700 million 1-year deal by Saudi Arabia, which is twice as much as the Saudi state paid to acquire Newcastle United. Mbappe, therefore, theoretically at least, would have made enough money, as there is no income tax in Saudi Arabia, to buy one of the biggest clubs in England outside of the Big Six off the back of just 6 months playing football for the same people, and the same state, that owns Newcastle United. That wouldn't just have seemed pie in the sky 70 or 80 years ago, when there was a little gap between the earnings of the best players in England and some third division players due to the imposition of a wage cap, or in the 1980s, when the average first division player earns around 3 times as much as the average worker in the United Kingdom, but even only 5 or 10 years ago, when superstar footballers already earned insane wages, but not enough to buy virtually any club outside of the 10 or 15 super clubs who are actually capable of employing them. I'm not even saying that this is a good or a bad thing, just that it's new and quite bizarre, and explains some of the behavioural changes that we see among footballers, both following retirement and, in Mbappe's case, even when they're only in their mid-20s. So one of the reasons why Kylian Mbappe has bought a football club is simply because he can. He can? See what I did there? But that's not the only reason. He might only be 25 years old, but Mbappe is one of the most carefully managed and business-minded people that the world of football has ever seen. David Beckham is probably the prototypical figure who became a global brand, rather than just a superstar footballer, but even he wasn't as laser-like in his focus, and the focus of those around him, from such a young age as Mbappe. In some ways, it's not all that surprising. Mbappe was a child prodigy who always looked set to become a huge success, and he began his career during the age of social media. Mbappe signed his first boot deal with Nike, in 2006, when he was just 7 years old. No, you heard me right there. Mbappe signed his first boot deal at 7. 18 years on, Mbappe is still endorsed by Nike, although his last deal with them, a 10-year partnership signed in 2019 and reported to be worth €140 million, was worth a little bit more than his first. Unlike a lot of highly marketable athletes though, Mbappe has been extremely selective in his brand deals. Not as selective as me, of course. I've never done any, despite Mountain Dew emailing me at least once a week for about 3 years. I hope that doesn't count as me endorsing them, but still pretty selective. Whereas David Beckham has done deals with the likes of Samsung, Maserati, Jaguar, Pepsi, Sainsbury's, H&M, Armani, Breitling, Burger King, Vodafone, Yahoo, AliExpress, and of course, the state of Qatar. And Cristiano Ronaldo has partnered with the likes of Herbalife, PokerStars, Castrol, KFC, Coca-Cola, Toyota, DAZN, Nubia, L'Oreal, Suzuki, CryptoCrap, that's not their company name, just my description, and of course, whatever the hell this was. Basically, if the cash was right, the answer was yes, nothing else mattered. Mbappe is reported to have turned down several lucrative brand deals, even from a very early age, before he was super rich, with one eye on his image and future deals. Prior to a recent deal with Xiaohongshu, often described as China's Instagram, Mbappe had only had 4 major commercial partnerships: Nike, Hublot, Oakley and EA Sports. This was all very deliberate. In 2017, when Mbappe was only 18 years old, he founded a company called KEWJF, a contraction of the initials of Mbappe's family members, Kylian, Ethan, Wilfred, Jirez and Pfizer. KEWJF was wholly owned by Mbappe, but his mum was appointed company president. KEWJF was created to manage all of Kylian's image rights, and by 2021, its annual revenue was already reported to be in excess of 20 million euros. Mbappe's image rights are so carefully managed, in fact, that it was the biggest stumbling block in his long-delayed move to Real Madrid. Throughout the first and second Galactico eras, Florentino Perez has always had one non-negotiable, and that is that all of Real Madrid's star players had to split their image rights 50-50 with the club. Even David Beckham agreed. Mbappe, however, is reported to have negotiated a unique deal, just as he did at PSG, which will see him retain 80% of his image rights in exchange for a reduced salary at Real Madrid, which will only see him earn slightly more than Jude Bellingham and Vinicius Jr. That is still reported to be in excess of 15 million euros a year after tax, so a little over £500,000 a week before tax, as well as a world record-breaking 150 million euros sign-on bonus, which is the equivalent to over 500,000 euros a week over the course of his 5-year contract at the Bernabeu. So, when I say we'll only see him earn. In late 2023, KEWJF was renamed and reorganised, ditching the family initials and becoming the much more corporate-sounding Interconnected Ventures. A better name for the business would have been Mbappe Holding Limited, because that is effectively what it is. A holding company for all of Mbappe's investments and business interests. Interconnected Ventures now has its own in-house legal department, as well as the media rights department, and a specific investment arm known as Coalition Capital. It was through Coalition Capital, a subsidiary of Interconnected Ventures, formerly known as KEWJF, that Mbappe bought Caen 2 weeks ago. There are both sentimental and business-related reasons that may have attracted Mbappe to Caen. Caen were very nearly Mbappe's first professional club. Although Mbappe caught the attention of several super clubs after being invited to train at Clairefontaine, France's national training centre, including Bayern Munich, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man City and Real Madrid, the last of whom invited him to train with the under-12s and visit the Real Madrid training centre when he was only 11 years old, Mbappe and his family had built up a 3-year relationship with Caen. A Ligue 1 team at the time, a scout from Caen was the first person in professional football to take a serious interest in Mbappe, and he went to great lengths to convince Mbappe's family that Caen would be the best club for the youngster's future development. Caen obviously couldn't rival Real Madrid or Bayern Munich for status or prestige, nor in terms of a financial package, but they promised Mbappe game time in their second team at 16, with a view to first team football at 17. Mbappe and his family weren't just laser-focused on brand Mbappe from a very early age, but also player Mbappe and his development, without which there would be nothing to build a brand around. In 2012, age 13, Mbappe was supposed to join the youth team at Caen via a verbal agreement, but after Caen were relegated by 1 point at the end of the 2011-12 season, they were no longer able to complete the deal. Mbappe and his family still resisted the urge to jump to a super club too quickly, rejecting Real Madrid and Chelsea to join Monaco, where Mbappe's ascent was rapid. His first team debut, age 16, breaking Thierry Henry's record as Monaco's youngest ever player, just so happened to come against Caen. And at the end of the game, he was applauded by the tiny pocket of travelling Caen supporters. For all of the fame and fortune that has followed, taking Mbappe to PSG, World Cup glory and Real Madrid, it seems as though he has never forgotten that it was Caen, when he was only 10 years old, who were the first club to put their faith in him. In that sense, then, there is something quite romantic about Mbappe, now possibly the best footballer on the planet, acquiring the club that he never got to represent because of their relegation from Ligue 1, with the dream of taking them back into France's top flight. but it would probably be somewhat naive to assume that that is Mbappe's only motive. For a start, coalition capital is the investment wing of Interconnected Ventures, not the philanthropic one. Mbappe's mum may still be the company's president, but Ziad Hamoud, a seasoned investment professional who spent over 8 years as a chief strategy and investment officer at beIN and was a director at Barclays before that, is the company's CEO. Following Coalition Capital's takeover, Hamoud is set to become Caen's new chairman. There are a few reasons why Mbappe, and more likely Hamoud, may have been drawn to Caen. For a start, it was cheap. For about a month's wage, Mbappe has bought a football club with plenty of growth potential. Caen have very recent Ligue experience and have come close to making a return in recent years, and promotion would immediately more than double the club's revenue. Secondly, Caen are one of only 2 major clubs, along with Le Havre, in the administrative region of Normandy. The population of Normandy is about 3.3 million, considerably larger than the city of Paris. Meanwhile, the Caen urban area alone is home to almost 500,000 people. There is potential, therefore, for Caen to sustain a club that competes in the top half of the Ligue table and consistently pulls in big crowds. Caen, as Mbappe knows all too well, also have an esteemed academy, a large catchment area for youth recruitment, and an impressive record when it comes to player development. The likes of Rafael Guerreiro, William Gallas, and Thomas Lemar all began their careers at Caen. Meanwhile, the Vikings were the club who gave N'Golo Kante his Ligue debut before selling him on to Leicester City. For all of the talent they have unearthed and nurtured, though, Caen haven't actually raised an enormous amount in player sales. Kante, almost 10 years ago now, remains Caen's club record sale, and even in his case, the £5.6 million that Leicester City paid for him is widely considered to be one of football's greatest bargains. If Mbappe Holdings Limited can maintain Caen's impressive record in terms of youth development, and indeed build upon it, whilst being a bit more shrewd when it comes to contract extensions and negotiations in player sales, Caen could quite quickly become a sustainable and even prosperous operation. This was already key to Caen's strategy over the last 4 years under Pierre-Antoine Capton. In 2020, the combination of dropping out of Ligue 1, COVID, failing to make an immediate top-flight return, and the collapse of the Media Pro television deal hit Caen like a ton of bricks. The club was in an economic mess. Pierre-Antoine Capton, co-founder of the French media conglomerate Media One, and a lifelong Caen supporter whose uncle played for the club during the 1950s, became a shareholder at Caen in 2017, and when disaster loomed in 2020, he made it his job to find a finance solution that could save the club's future. Capton eventually found a willing partner in Oaktree Capital Management, a Los Angeles-based asset management firm who acquired an 80% controlling interest in the club. Oaktree, which became a subsidiary of Brookfield Asset Management in 2019, are one of the world's largest investors in distressed assets. That is, a very nice way of saying that they invest in companies that are either about to or have already gone bust. Oaktree specialise in what are called alternative investment strategies, which just refers to any asset class that isn't stocks, bonds or cash, and often look to revive ailing companies before moving them on for a profit. One example would be the surf-inspired apparel brands Billabong and Quicksilver, both of which Oaktree acquired as distressed assets after they were unable to repay loans that Oaktree had made them, before unifying them and other brands under the umbrella of Board Riders Inc. and selling the business for $1.25 billion to the Authentic Brands Group in 2023. Oaktree has some $193 billion in assets under management, including Italian giants Inter Milan, who they acquired in May 2024 after the club's previous owners, the crisis-ridden Chinese firm Suning Holding, failed to repay a €395 million loan that they had borrowed from Oaktree during COVID. Suning foregoing ownership of Inter to Oaktree also meant that Oaktree inherited Inter's debt, which totals more than €800 million, but for 3-time champions of Europe, one of the most recognisable brands in world football, and the club, who just won the Serie A title by a country mile, most observers consider it to be a bargain. Oaktree are effectively accidental football club owners though, and although they claim that they are in no rush to sell Inter, presumably because they feel they can get a better price in a few years' time, their influence at Caen, despite being 80% shareholders, was always limited. Capton, who owned the remaining 20% of the club, was the chairman of the supervisory board, in charge of day-to-day decision-making, including the appointment of former Caen player Olivier Picou, who oversaw the rise of Angers from the Championnat National to Ligue 1, as Caen's new chairman. Over the last 4 years, under Oaktree and Capton, Caen have raised around €20 million in player sales, as well as going from escaping relegation only by virtue of goal difference in the 2020-21 season to 7th, 5th and 6th over the last 3 years. Picou has now been replaced as chairman by Hamoud, but Capton has retained his 20% stake in his boyhood club, and it seems likely that he will remain heavily involved under Mbappe. Since Coalition's takeover, Caen have signed 2 players, Jan Mvia and Lorenzo Rajo, both on free transfers, from West Brom and Rodez. Mvia barely played for West Brom last season, but has bags of experience and is a former French international. Meanwhile, Rajo was the star man for a Rodez team that finished 4th, 2 places above Caen, in the Ligue 2 table last season. France has very strict spending rules, which would prohibit Mbappe Corporation from bankrolling a promotion push even if they wanted to, but Caen are likely to have the second highest average attendance in Ligue 2 this season, behind Metz, so they will have more revenue than most. Mbappe, and Brand Mbappe, are also incredibly well connected within the business world, opening up the possibility of lucrative commercial deals and partnerships, like we have seen at Wrexham for example, even if they are only for those companies to get closer to Mbappe. Caen also have a relatively large and modern stadium, the Stade Michel d'Ornano, which opened in 1993 after coming in at about 3 times over budget. Caen's stadium is owned by the local municipality, but the mayor of Caen, Joël Brunner, has been extremely welcoming in Mbappe's acquisition of the city's club, and it's not unthinkable that the city could be open to a sale. The Stade Michel d'Ornano is located fairly centrally, a short walk west of Caen's historic city centre, opening up the possibility that Coalition's investment could be a real estate play as much as a sporting endeavour. Since Coalition is so new, and one of Mbappe's first public investments is Caen, it is difficult to know exactly how, if at all, they plan to specialise. There is a perception among some that football clubs are always a bad investment. If you want to become a millionaire, just become a billionaire and buy a football club, or so the old joke goes. But that isn't really true. Plenty of people have lost money investing in football clubs, but plenty have amassed a small fortune. The Glazers, John W. Henry, and Stan Kroenke at Manchester United, Liverpool and Arsenal, for example, have all overseen extraordinary growth in the value of their assets, in some cases, without really doing much of anything. In some cases, indeed, they have actively made the clubs that they own worse, with 0 negative financial consequences. The Glazers have turned Manchester United from an unstoppable force in English football and Champions League mainstays into a team that hasn't won a Premier League title in more than a decade, but that hasn't stopped Manchester United's value from rising from £790 million when they bought the club in 2005, most of it through debt leveraged against the club's own assets, to roughly £5 billion now, an increase of over 500%. That's partly because they have continued to market the club well and negotiate lucrative commercial deals, but principally, it's just because the amount of money in football, particularly in terms of the TV rights in the Premier League, have increased so dramatically during that time. If you think that European football can still grow, particularly in terms of overseas broadcast, commercial, and direct-to-consumer deals, as a lot of investors do, then a lot of clubs look very cheap. For Mbappe and Coalition, Caen represents a sentimental investment which will be well received by supporters, a considerable growth opportunity thanks to Caen's academy catchment area, Mbappe's commercial connections and a potential promotion to Ligue 1, and a means of diversification into the industry that he knows better than any other for a very modest fee. That is a neat and coherent explanation, but make no mistake, this is still all very strange. It is the equivalent, in an English context, of Trent Alexander-Arnold buying Watford, which, I think we can all agree, would be odd. Elite footballers are so rich now, not compared to the super rich billionaire owners of Premier League teams, but certainly compared to every generation that has preceded them, that it will be interesting to see whether Mbappe has set a precedent, and Jude Bellingham goes out and buys Plymouth Argyle, Lamine Yamal tries to take Deportivo La Coruña back into La Liga, and Jamal Musiala launches a leverage buyout of Darmstadt, or whether Mbappe, as he has done throughout his off-field career, is charting a more unique path, at least at such an early age. Caen play their first game of the season this Saturday against Paris FC, a day before Mbappe's likely La Liga debut against Mallorca for Real Madrid. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. I obviously hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, which now has 3 videos. No, make sure you check them out. Both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads via the username at HITC Sevens on all 3, should you wish to do so. And all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers!